In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between dependent and independent variables when referring to bivariate scatterplots. Now, this is a topic we talked about earlier in a topic called linear functions, and there are some similarities to this, and there's also some differences as well. Let's start by talking about the similarities. We have a scatterplot here. Our horizontal axis represents our study time. We always put our independent variable on our horizontal axis. We also have our vertical axis, which is our exam mark. We always put our dependent variable on our vertical axis. Also, when we have our table of values, our independent variable always goes on the top row, and our dependent variable always goes on the bottom row. Now we'll talk about how this is quite different to linear functions. When we spoke about dependent variables in linear functions, we mentioned that it was dependent because you couldn't really calculate it without first knowing the independent variable. So it was dependent on the other variable or the independent variable. That's not always the case with bivariate scatterplots. For example, you can find out the student's exam mark without knowing the amount of study time they got. So why do we refer to the exam mark or the vertical axis in this case as the dependent variable? To answer this, we need to look at why we make bivariate scatterplots. And the whole reason we make bivariate scatterplots is to make predictions. What sort of predictions are we making? Well, if someone came along, let's say a student came and said, look, I can only put 10 hours of study in before this exam. How do you think I'm going to go if I can only put in 10 hours of study? Well, because we've been able to draw a curve here that follows our bivariate scatterplot, we can now make a prediction. You'll see that if you put in 10 hours of study, we predict that you will get a mark of about 80%. It's the prediction that is the dependent variable. In order to predict the mark that you will get, we need to first know how many hours of study you put in. Anyway, that concludes our video comparing dependent and independent variables. Remember to read the description below for links to workbooklets that relate to this video.